I think the Great Feminization, the channeling of so many women of childbearing age into the workforce, has had two really big, potentially civilization-ending consequences.
Hi, and welcome to, or back to, my channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions about whatever catches my attention. I'm Kit, and today we'll be looking at an episode of Triggernometry, The Problem with Feminizing Society, thumbnail, Too Many Women, ? With Helen Andrews. Mr. O, you're fired. Yes, the Helen Andrews that wrote of The Great Feminization. So I have a theory about what this is going to be about, but I hope I'm wrong. Anyway, per Wikipedia, Helen Andrews is a conservative political commentator and author. She has a BA in religious studies from Yale, and she is also the author of Boomers, the Men and Women Who Promised Freedom and Delivered Disaster. Let's get into it.
I mean, I'll let you say it in your own words, but it's kind of a little bit about how the fact that women now control, or at least represent, the majority of the employees at many institutions is one of the reasons that society has gone the way it has. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say.
Citation needed, and we're not even a minute in. But that is what I thought this would be about. Women are too visible, so people feel like they're taking over, and of course, if women are taking over, that means things are being feminized. Despite the plethora of how to be feminine content, which would indicate that being feminine isn't something women innately are, and thus, how can they feminize institutions, and also, why is that bad? If we're operating under the assumption that the presence of women makes something more feminine, and that apparently is bad, I'm guessing, and that's why society is the way it is meant to be understood as not good, though I would love for them to clarify. That means before, when women weren't present, or present to a lesser degree, those things were masculine, and that was good, or at least fine. So, why is masculine fine and feminine bad? Do I need to remind everyone that women make up 50% of the US population? And that's still only 29% of the House, 25% of the Senate, 32% of state legislatures, 24% of governors, 11% of Fortune 500 CEOs, 30% of Fortune 500 board members, 33% of college and university presidents, and 21% of clergy are women. So, please, what institutions are just being overrun by women and thereby feminized due to our excessive presence? I would also like to add that whenever someone points this out, there is always someone who says things like, well, women just don't want those jobs, or, well, women just aren't suited for those things. So, TLDR, women don't have ambition, but if they did, they would feminize everything and thereby ruin it, so they just shouldn't even try. Got it.
Some people have reacted to the piece by, acting as if I'm saying women cause all the problems in the world. I'm definitely not saying that, but I am saying that feminization has caused one specific particular problem, and that is wokeness. Like a lot of people, I was baffled by the woke phenomenon. Why did everyone seemingly go crazy all at once in the summer of 2020? It was inexplicable. It seemed to be mass hysteria, genuinely.
Some people say women don't stand for anything, we're weak, we just passively observe, but per Helen, women caused massive protests in 2020. Look at that, women can do things after all. Anyway, time for history lesson. Quote, the use of woke as an in-group signal urging Black people to be aware of the systems that harm and otherwise put us at a disadvantage is documented as far back as the 1920s. The Jamaican philosopher Marcus Garvey, exhorting members of the Black diaspora in America, Jamaica, and elsewhere to join the cause of Pan-Africanism, called on them to wake up. By 1938, the iconic American blues musician Lead Belly had recorded the song Scottsboro Boys. The ballad tells the true story of 4 Black youths who were falsely accused of raping a white woman in Scottsboro, Alabama, and subsequently convicted by an all-white jury and sentenced to death, though they were thankfully freed after several appeals and trials. In the song, Lead Belly says of Alabama, I advise everybody to be a little careful when they go down there. Stay woke. Keep your eyes open. The use of the word woke continued to spread throughout all sectors of Black Americans' lives. In 1940, after finding out they were being paid less than their white counterparts, the leader of a Black mine workers union in West Virginia that launched a strike against discriminatory pay reportedly said, we were asleep, but we will stay woke from now on. The word, in this Black-specific sense, will continue to show up across the decades. Woke almost certainly also showed up in the everyday conversations of Black people from the South, Midwest, and the East Coast, including in Harlem. The New York City neighborhood has historically been a Black mecca, and it's where Kelly first heard the word woke being used in the context of the Black Power movement, according to what Watson was told by the writer's surviving family. It's perhaps this very context, Black people's awareness of their history and their power to resist injustice, that made woke so ripe for the pernicious mutation it has now undergone. Indeed, the forced transformation of the colloquialism echoes how countless other Black ideas and intellectual contributions have been maligned. When people during the Civil Rights Movement began saying Black Power, all of a sudden it became a term that people equated with communism and anti-white sentiment, and then it eventually gave birth to white power. The 1619 Project, which centers the ramifications of slavery and the contributions of Black people in American history, has become an insult. Black Lives Matter became an anti-white sentiment that was banned in school and spawned All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. And like Black Lives Matter became known to the world through the power of Twitter, so too has social media aided in the rapid spread of woke and other Black culture creations beyond the radius of the communities in which they were formed. Erykah Badu's 2008 track, Master Teacher, is widely credited with reintroducing Stay Woke to the modern lexicon. However, Watson believes it was Badu's use of the phrase on Twitter, while advocating for the freedom of Russian feminist protesters, that ultimately helped propel woke around the globe. Kelly spoke to this, how these words evolve, says Watson. We see how quick they evolve, even quicker with the advent of social media. It just amplifies the speed in which things no longer belong to the creator, and especially as that pertains to Black people. We see this with our dances, with our language. What starts off as ours quickly becomes appropriated. Add in the traditional media outlets that ran articles presenting woke as trendy new slang for readers to add to their vocabularies, and the spread, appropriation, and ultimate dilution of woke was practically guaranteed. But who is culpable for the especially feverish escalation around the word woke that has noticeably peaked following 2020's racial justice reckoning, which at the time inspired a groundswell of interest among Americans seeking to learn more about systemic racism and the history of anti-Blackness in this country? The answer, of course, includes politically motivated elected officials and other bad actors seeking to fearmonger and hold back racial justice progress. But it also goes beyond that. Harriot points to the role of mainstream newsrooms in which Black people are still shockingly marginalized. When you see Black journalists at a news organization or in a media corporation, they seldom have any decision-making power. What we're talking about is white people concocting the way we understand language and the way we understand the current world. Very seldom is there any Black input, and well-meaning progressives who took on the woke label with gusto perhaps weren't fully embodying its true meaning in their casual embrace of the word. It's a very surface-level descriptor of trying to claim that you're progressive, says Watson. It's much more complex than just saying, I'm a liberal. If you're not trying to envision and make a better world for people, you're not as woke as you think you are. To some, woke is now a derisive stand-in for diversity, inclusion, empathy, and yes, Blackness. So, when legislators pass a law to stop woke in light of the word's true history as well as its commonly understood meaning, what are they really saying? In Harriot's view, the manipulation of woke has been key to affecting policies that, when looked at plainly, reveal a foundational hostility to values most Americans share. This includes recognizing and honoring icons who toiled to bring our nation closer to living up to its ideals of justice and fairness, where everyone can thrive and live without fear of being targeted for who they are. It's hard to get people to demonize human beings and lives and history, but it's easy to get them to demonize a word. And if you can use that word as a placeholder for those people, for caring about those people, then it's easy to demonize instead of saying, we're just going to stop caring about people, Harriot concludes. Watson agrees. When I think of political figures like DeSantis and the rampant fight against critical race theory, you are really trying to erase history and trying to erase knowledge that we need to grow better as a people. The fact that you're trying to hide those experiences all for the comfort of your white fragility is troubling, harmful, and, most importantly, dangerous. And that's literally everything that woke goes against. End quote. I never want to hear someone complain about woke again. They are either unforgivably cruel or shockingly ignorant.
And the more I thought about what caused it, which is a very important question because if we know what causes it, we know how to prevent it from happening in the future. I read an article that someone else wrote that put forward a really simple, elegant thesis, which is that wokeness is simply feminine patterns of behavior applied to institutions where women had not been very well represented until recently.
Unforgivably stupid is also an option. To be clear, according to Helen Andrews, woke is feminine patterns of behavior. What does that even mean? Feminine patterns of behavior applied to institutions where women have not been very well represented. What does that mean? Setting aside that we're discounting the long history of the word woke and Helen is, weirdly, making it all about women, does she even know what it means? Also, am I being obtuse, or when she talks about how to stop it from happening again, by which I assume she means protests, she isn't referring to whatever is being protested, but the protesting in general? Because that's actually not helpful. Injustice should be protested.
Women tend to be more consensus-focused, consensus-oriented. Men, when they're approaching a moral question, will ask, what are the facts? What are the rules? Whereas women will say, what are the relationships at play here? How can we make everybody happy? Mm-hmm. How can we reach an outcome that will satisfy all the parties? As opposed to the male perspective of how do we reach an outcome that is just and according to the rules.
Helen is a great example of unacknowledged privilege. You can take the time to get a consensus or follow the rules when you have a seat at the table. Protesters don't have a seat at the table. That's one of the reasons they're protesting. But honestly, I don't think Helen can imagine not having a seat. And this is what we call a patriarchal bargain. Helen will play by patriarchy's rules so long as she gets a seat, even if her voice doesn't count for as much as a man's. Love the idea that women don't care about justice, though. Women just protest for fun?
That sounded a lot like wokeness to me.
And Helen was wrong. I do love how these two just nod along, though, and don't ask any meaningful questions. Like, for example, how would you define woke? I would love to hear her definition. Personally, I would define it as being aware, aka awake, to the injustices of the world.
And the sort of piece that made it all click into place for me was the coincidence of timing. It is the case, just we can all agree as a matter of fact, that a lot of institutions that went woke or were affected by wokeness became demographically female in the last 5 years. Law schools in America turned majority female in 2016, and they've gotten a little bit more female every year since then. I think now it stands at 55, 56%.
Women make up 56% of law school students. Are we supposed to believe that law school students are in positions of power?
The New York Times became majority female in its workforce in 2018, which is maybe why it was so susceptible to the fads of wokeness and the internal policing and the Slack revolts that took place internally over there.
I couldn't find anything to confirm that, but did liberal feminism ruin the workplace? An opinion piece published by the New York Times did pop up. I'm sure the New York Times is very progressive. Nothing more forward-thinking than misogyny.
Medical schools are now majority female. The white-collar workforce overall, employees in the United States with college degrees, a majority of them are women. And managers, management positions in the U.S. workforce, 46% female, so almost majority female. So the fact that all of these institutions tipped over to being majority female around the same time that wokeness emerged seemed to me that couldn't possibly be a coincidence.
Fact check. True regarding medical school and college as well as manager jobs. Can't confirm on white-collar workforce. And that's supposed to be women overtaking institutions and feminizing them? Women are more likely to be enrolled in college and be managers? I don't know what world Helen lives in, but students and employees don't have the power. The people with money, the people with government positions, they have the power. And that is still overwhelmingly men.
Well, you mentioned consensus and sort of empathy and including all perspectives. That really isn't what happened with wokeness, though, is it? Because it was more like, we've come to a new consensus and anyone who doesn't agree is going to get killed, basically.
What world are any of these people living in? And before anyone starts, 93% of the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 were peaceful. And there is no, oh, you're not woke? Okay, I'm going to kill you. They move on to talking about gender differences, and I'm supposed to believe that feminization is bad?
Very often, if you're studying gender differences, and you're a psychologist, the way you'll do your study is you'll just go to a playground and watch the kids playing and observe and count up how many times somebody hits somebody else or something like that.
I don't know if that's true, but if so, that seems really unscientific. Also, shouldn't we be teaching kids to not hit each other?
And there was an experiment of that type done, I believe, in Scandinavia, and it had a really funny outcome. The psychologists observed the kids playing and counted up how many fights they had. And they said, okay, we observe that the men fight a lot more than the girls.
I'm sorry, the men and the girls? I thought they were studying kids.
But then as a supplement, they decided to confirm their observations by talking to the kids and saying, how many fights did you have today, Billy? Or how many fights did you have today, Sally? And their discrepancy was huge. They found that the girls reported having just as many fights as the men.
Stop calling boys men. Per Helen herself, we are talking about children.
The level of conflict, male and female, on that schoolyard was exactly the same. But their observations had failed to record any of the female conflicts because when they asked the girls, oh, you had a fight today, what did that entail? It was things like, Megan said she was going to tell everybody they couldn't be my friend anymore.
Am I surprised that psychologists who apparently do their research by watching A School Recess don't bother defining what they mean by fighting? I suppose not. But damn, I don't even have a college degree, and I know there's many different ways to fight.
And one of the most consistent psychological differences between men and women is women have a strong impulse of caring, right? Which is exactly, I'm not somebody who looks to evolutionary biology for the solutions to all human phenomena. But this particular one does seem glaringly Darwinian, right? That women see helpless things and they want to take care of them. That is definitely something that Darwin would find a pretty easy explanation for. But that's also something that wokeness can easily weaponize. It means that if you can frame your political issue as a way of caring for some helpless class, then you're golden, right?
Minorities are babies.
That's right. But that is precisely what's going on at a deeper level. And that's why it's been so effective.
No. You see injustice, you protest injustice. It is not weaponizing empathy. I expect these two will have Ali Bastakian soon, or baby minorities. You see injustice, you stand up. That is not hard to understand. Unless, of course, you're determined to not see injustice, then you have to find another way to explain things, lest you pop your comfortable bubble.
But you cited one particular case, which is the former president of Harvard. So let's talk about that, because you use it as the main example for the thrust of your argument.
That's right. This was back in 2005. So this is before anybody had ever heard of wokeness.
Before anyone had heard of wokeness? What about Black people? Hello? Does Helen think white people, specifically white women, invented wokeness?
Now, I don't know if your listeners in the UK will be familiar with Larry Summers, but he was at that time probably one of the 10 most powerful people in the country. He was not just the president of Harvard. He had also been in Bill Clinton's cabinet. He had been at the World Bank. He was an academically eminent economist, very well connected in the Democratic Party, just a really powerful guy. He was invited to give a speech at a conference on female underrepresentation in science and math, and he decided to deliver his remarks off the cuff and to be really... And actually, if you know anything about Larry Summers, he has a reputation for being a really blunt guy. He's somebody who does not suffer fools gladly. So when you're getting the blunt Larry Summers, you're really getting something quite direct. But the talk was supposed to be off the record. And that's important to emphasize, that the women who listened to what he said and took it to a reporter were violating the rules that they had undertaken to follow when they attended.
Someone correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't off the record mean you're speaking to a reporter that can't print what you say, or they can't say you were the one who said it? I wouldn't think it applies to a speech and you were in the audience, unless she means they signed NDAs. But what the hell kind of speech are you giving where people have to keep it secret?
Anyway, he said that female underrepresentation in the hard sciences was attributable to a lot of different factors, not necessarily just prejudice or bias or the patriarchy not thinking ladies can be scientists. There is a difference of aptitude at the very, very, very high ends. If you're talking about people who are going to be tenured at MIT, that's the way out at the end of the bell curve, and there tend to be more men out there than women. And also differences in taste. That is, women tend to gravitate towards professions and fields where they get to deal with people as opposed to something really cold and abstract like physics. Not to say that no women do, but that is the tendency. So women who are way out there at that end of the bell curve and have the aptitude for a career in hard science would maybe gravitate to something like medicine as opposed to something like physics. So Larry Summers said all this, and there were a bunch of lady scientists in the audience who said, "How dare you?" And they gave quotes to a reporter, something like, "I felt like I was going to throw up," or "I thought I was going to black out." And it became a huge controversy. And there were a lot of other controversies during Larry Summers' tenure as president of Harvard. So that was not the only thing that brought him down, but it was definitely at the very top of the list. And about a year later, he resigned.
That is insulting, and women weren't wrong for finding it so. Also, you say offensive shit and then cry when people react to it? Really? Helen is burying the lead a bit, though. That was just part of the reason Larry Summers resigned from Harvard. The first time. Yes, that poor man, hounded by those vengeful harpies, actually did not die penniless and alone due to the unjust persecution by the women. He went on to work as a managing partner at a hedge fund, was part of the Obama administration, and following Harvard's Epstein investigation, is stepping down as a professor at the end of this academic year. Poor man.
What's really interesting is with that case, and now I don't doubt that it caused a massive stir when he went on and basically went, "I'm going to freestyle and deliver truth bombs to all of you, so here you are, enjoy it." But he's also, if you get to be president of Harvard, you are going to make enemies aplenty. In order to get to that position, you're going to have to fire people, antagonize people, because that's just the nature of the job. So he would have had loads of enemies who were willing just to pounce at that particular moment, surely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember some of the other controversies that have attended Larry Summers' career. And I believe one from his tenure at the World Bank was when he said, are we sure we want to really, really enforce labor laws against having sweatshops in third world countries? Because isn't having sweatshops good for them sometimes? I mean, it leads to economic development. He phrased it in a really blunt way. So like, this is a guy who has a history of putting his foot in his mouth in a way that I frankly find really admirable.
Yeah. But certain people don't.
I mean, yes, please tell us up front that you're a shitty person, but what? There's nothing admirable about even floating the idea that, hey, sweatshops can be good. Who are these people?
So then has that been extrapolated right the way through society, essentially, is your argument?
That was one of the first times that a cancellation happened, that people heard somebody say something offensive, pitched a little fit, and managed to rob this person of his job.
Oh no, ma'am. You do not get to play that line. Setting aside that he went on to have a very lucrative career and he returned to Harvard, it wasn't even about his comments regarding women. That was just the cover, because it's easier to blame women than to think, hey, maybe other things are going on. Like, oh, I don't know, belittling the work of other professors and some expensive favoritism. But no, it was women being upset by one of his speeches that did it. And he was just being honest, too. Women are just so respected in society.
I hope I'm not revealing anything that I shouldn't, in terms of, because I can't remember if this is something I heard Jordan say publicly or privately, but I don't think he'd mind me sharing this. I mean, one of the things he talked to me about was the fact that the female mind sort of has three categories for other human beings. One of them is baby, i.e. infant, needs care. Another one is caregiver, i.e. spouse, mother-in-law, etc. And then it sort of kind of makes sense to treat everybody else as a potential enemy just from a safety perspective. Well, you don't know them, so you might as well make sure that you are extra careful. And what you do with the enemy, if you establish that they're the enemy, is you get away, and if you can't, you destroy them somehow, right?
Citation fucking needed.
The reason why this feminization thesis kind of sparked my interest in a way that gender dynamics in general never really did is that it is something unprecedented. It is that miraculous thing, something in the gender wars that is truly new. We have no civilization on the planet has ever had a situation where they can look forward to a day when a majority of judges are going to be female. Or they can anticipate a day not too long from now when the majority of legislators in their parliament are going to be female, when they have female police chiefs in their largest cities, or the legal profession in general is on its way to being majority female. That is something unprecedented. So it's really not that surprising and shouldn't really be that controversial to say that something no civilization in human history has ever faced is posing new problems that we haven't seen before.
It's so interesting that she says that, because to the unsuspecting listener, you might be thinking, yeah, changing a profession from majority male to majority female might make a difference. And sure, fresh eyes that have had different experiences to the former norm, can change things. However, in her article, Helen writes, quote, "The threat posed by wokeness can be large or small depending on the industry. It's sad that English departments are all feminized now, but most people's daily lives are unaffected by it. Other fields matter more. You might not be a journalist, but you live in a country where what gets written in the New York Times determines what is publicly accepted as the truth. If the Times becomes a place where in-group consensus can suppress unpopular facts, more so than it already does, that affects every citizen. The field that frightens me most is the law. All of us depend on a functioning legal system, and to be blunt, the rule of law will not survive the legal profession becoming majority female. The rule of law is not just about writing rules down. It means following them even when they yield an outcome that tugs at your heartstrings or runs contrary to your gut sense of which party is more sympathetic." End quote. In my opinion, Helen is downplaying what she really thinks in this interview. Sure, she thinks women lead to woke and we should be wary of woke, but it is painfully obvious that she thinks women lead to woke and woke is bad. In fact, it's not only bad, it is actually dangerous. Helen is frightened of women becoming the majority of legal professionals because she thinks women are less rational. There is no merit to that fear.
The problem is that in the United States right now, there are a lot of legal thumbs on the scale that tend to really, really empower the HR lady in your office and give her veto power of everything that anybody does who works at your company. And that has led to a feminization of every workplace, every large institution in America. So I think that is a thumb on the scale that makes it hard for institutions that might be more suited to masculine modes of interaction to pursue them.
Just in case anyone watching this didn't know, Helen clearly doesn't, HR is not there for you. They are there for the company.
But I think the some of the reaction to the article I wrote that was negative came from people who just really don't know what the law mandates today. People out there who read it did not believe me when I said that you can be sued for not hiring enough women at your company and for not promoting enough women at your company. But that is truly the case.
Helen is downplaying again. This is what she wrote in her article, quote, "There are many people who think the Great Feminization is a naturally occurring phenomenon. Women were finally given a chance to compete with men, and it turned out they were just better. That is why there are so many women in our newsrooms, running our political parties, and managing our corporations. That is what feminists think happened, but they are wrong. Feminization is not an organic result of women outcompeting men. It is an artificial result of social engineering, and if we take our thumb off the scale, it will collapse within a generation. The most obvious thumb on the scale is anti-discrimination law. It is illegal to employ too few women at your company. If women are underrepresented, especially in your higher management, that is a lawsuit waiting to happen. As a result, employers give women jobs and promotions they would not otherwise have gotten, simply in order to keep their numbers up." End quote. She goes on to cite Texaco, Goldman Sachs, Novartis, and Coca-Cola, trust and conservative side with corporations, as proof of this, so let's see. Texaco, quote, "A federal agency has found that Texaco Inc., which reached a landmark settlement with black employees in 1997, underpaid some women at offices around the country between 1993 and 1996. The company, without admitting any violations, has agreed to pay $3.1 million to the 186 women who held managerial and support jobs at its White Plains headquarters and elsewhere," company spokeswoman Kelly McAndrews said Wednesday. The number is 2% of Texaco's female employees. "This was a cooperative agreement," Ms. McAndrews said. "We're very pleased that the agency found no violations. The agreement is the largest resulting from an audit by the Labor Department's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, which monitors affirmative action at companies that do business with the government. But it is dwarfed by the $176 million settlement the company reached in the racial discrimination case. That case brought notoriety to Texaco because of tape recordings on which company executives belittled black employees and discussed destroying documents sought by the plaintiffs." Goldman Sachs, quote, "Chen Oster versus Goldman Sachs was filed in 2010. The case, which accused Goldman Sachs of maintaining a sexist culture where women earned lower pay and received fewer opportunities for raises and promotions, spanned 13 years. At the center of the lawsuit was Goldman's biased performance review process. The bank used a 360-degree review model in which an employee's supervisors, coworkers, and subordinates would review their performance each year and rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. Those ratings would then be used to place employees into quartiles, which determine their eligibility for promotions and raises. The lawsuit claims spots in the top quartile were limited and most often went to men. Women were also vastly underrepresented among the bank's upper management, which further contributed to biased promotion decisions, according to the lawsuit. On the surface, 360 reviews and quartiling were seemingly neutral processes, but statistical analysis showed these subjective processes systemically favored male employees, causing women to receive lower pay, smaller raises, and fewer business opportunities. Novartis, quote, "Plaintiffs in Velas were 19 women presently or formerly employed by Novartis in sales-related positions who claimed that Novartis discriminated against them in various ways, including by disadvantaging them in compensation and promotional opportunities, as well as giving them negative performance appraisals and otherwise subjecting them to adverse treatment for taking pregnancy-related leaves." End quote. As for Coca-Cola, all I can tell you is that they are currently being sued by the EEOC for hosting a women-only networking event. I wonder if Helen would also find that objectionable. I do find it telling that she assumes the findings weren't justified, but she also writes this, quote, "Anti-discrimination law requires that every workplace be feminized. A landmark case in 1981 found that pinup posters on the walls of a shipyard constituted a hostile environment for women, and that principle has grown to encompass many forms of masculine conduct. Dozens of Silicon Valley companies have been hit with lawsuits alleging frat boy culture or toxic bro culture, and a law firm specializing in these lawsuits brags of settlements ranging from $450,000 to $8 million. Women can sue their bosses for running a workplace that feels like a fraternity house, but men can't sue when the workplace feels like a Montessori kindergarten. Naturally, employers err on the side of making the office softer. So if women are thriving more in the modern workplace, is that really because they are outcompeting men, or is it because the rules have been changed to favor them?" End quote. Has Helen ever been in a workplace? There is no reason to have pinup posters at work. And how the hell is that masculine? Or is objectifying women a masculine trait that, if not allowed, is discriminating against a man's God-given right to ogle women at work? Also, I'm not familiar with Montessori kindergartens, but from the pictures, do puzzles and crayons dehumanize people? No? Well, There's your answer as to why Montessori kindergarten is okay and pinup posters are not. In the video, she brings up the Sears case from 1980, and that was the EEOC doing its job.
It took Sears a lot of money to defend against that lawsuit.
My heart bleeds for Sears. It is painfully obvious that Helen doesn't believe discrimination should be investigated. But yes, Helen, the government does need to ensure companies are following the law. It's like if the EPA passed clean air regulations and then never bothered enforcing it. Also, I really enjoy how we get not even a level playing field, and there's articles about how society is dying, the workplace is feminized, men are struggling. I am not saying men don't struggle, but it is wild to me that a woman, not even women as a group, get any small sort of success and it's a crisis. We can have male-only presidents, we can and do have male-dominated jobs in government, and that is women's fault for not working hard enough, not being ambitious enough. It is also women's fault when there are female-dominated jobs and societies for taking things that belong to men, for wanting to be above men. There is no winning here. If you're a woman, it doesn't matter who you are or what you're doing something wrong.
We got a glimpse of what a maximally feminized legal system might look like here in the United States in our Title IX campus courts for sexual assault. I don't know how it's done in the UK, but here in the US in 2011, the Obama administration mandated that universities in the United States adopt certain rules for adjudicating allegations of sexual assault on campus. Things like you had to use a preponderance of evidence standard. So no more proving things beyond a reasonable doubt. Men who were accused were no longer allowed to confront their accusers because that might be traumatizing. It was just basically the wish list that we saw during the Me Too era, which, a lot of people were sympathetic to because nobody wants, sexual abuse or sexual assault or anything like that. But on the other hand, you also want these legal protections and due process protections that have evolved over centuries for very good reasons.
Sexual assault is difficult to prove since it usually happens in private, but I am curious. Does Helen think women just lie about everything? Discrimination, assault? What does she think has fundamentally changed following Me Too? She says a lot of people were unfairly accused and had their lives ruined. Who? This is apparently what she considers feminist values, throwing out due process, and I wonder what her thoughts are about the deportations, but also that is not a feminist value. A feminist value is believing women. That doesn't mean guilty until proven innocent. It means taking what we say seriously and investigating.
I completely agree with you. I mean, and there's many cases. Let's not get into that. But you said campus courts. And as somebody who was brought up, we were both brought up in the UK, and we went to university in the UK, etc. I've never heard of a campus court. That immediately rings alarm bells. Why is there a campus court? What is this?
That's right. You would think women who had some bad sexual experience, like a hookup that went wrong or anything like that, could then go to their university and say, that guy raped me or whatever.
So, yes, Helen does believe that women just lie about everything.
And Helen, how much of this is to do with young women not having kids and therefore their empathy has to go somewhere? It's a controversial question because we know that women, as they have kids, they become more conservative, their priorities change, they focus more on family than they do on social issues.
I have certainly met liberal women whom I would be so bold as to psychoanalyze that is exactly what is going on.
Stop. Women are not stupid. We do not see a pet or a plant and think baby. We do not have some innate maternal nature that just has to be expressed in some way or another. Some people, keywords being some people, are more empathetic than others, just like some people are more action-oriented than others, and so they have an interest in social causes. That is not thwarted maternal instinct. That is just who they are. And it is mind-blowing to me that folks like Helen and Frances here see women being involved in social causes, taking a step back if they have kids, and just assume they were only involved in social causes because of that maternal instinct with no outlet, instead of the fact that kids, especially young ones, take a lot of time and energy, and even in the 21st century, most of that time and energy is given by the mother. Nope, not even a thought. They clearly were never interested in social causes, they were just yearning for motherhood. The way these folks stuff women into these tiny boxes without a second thought, I hate it.
I think the Great Feminization, the channeling of so many women of childbearing age into the workforce, has had two really big, potentially civilization-ending consequences. One is the one I've been talking about, which is the feminization of institutions that makes them no longer function well. The other is declining birth rates, that if you have too many women too dedicated to their careers or engaged in other activities, and so that they're not having kids, that too can cause the end of your civilization. So it's, but I feel like there are a lot of people working on the birth rate stuff. But it's not a coincidence, I guess is what I'm trying to say, that these two problems have arisen at the same time because they are both connected to the same phenomenon. It is a phenomenon that, like I said before, is one that no human civilization in history has ever faced. So it's not surprising that it would yield huge unprecedented problems. I think the falling birth rate is one of them.
Setting aside the things in our era that might make people not want kids, and no previous era is also experiencing problems, doesn't mean that people now should just suck it up and spawn. We are also currently in a period of time where kids are not an additional farmhand, kids usually live to adulthood, a family's livelihood is not their home, and women have a reliable birth control method. Has it ever occurred to any of these birth rate fearmongers that for the first time in history, we're seeing how many kids women have when they get to make the decision? And I do love how they always mention the birth rate. And they always tie it to women, to something women are doing. College, working, having too high a standard for men, but they never offer their solution. The unspoken just hangs there for us to fill in. But I would love for these three to tell us how they think the birth rate should be raised. I'll share my thoughts. Instead of plotting ways to get, I say get, but really I mean coerce, women into having kids, having more kids, we should raise taxes to make up for the income that will be generated by a smaller population and figure out ways to care for an aging population. And while we're at it, we should include ways to help families so people who do want kids can have them without fear of bankruptcy. That is the only ethical way to do this. But it is undoubtedly easier to just try to guilt, scare, and if that doesn't work, legislate women into pregnancy. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, please see the abortion restrictions and how Republicans are also going after birth control. Anyway, they conclude with a chat about universities being indoctrination centers, the two-income trap. Helen thinks reducing immigration will reduce the amount of money couples need to make a living comfortably, and it is wild to me that that is what she goes to instead of looking at, CEO versus worker pay.
All of the things we've talked about so far, you're an expert in and we're not.
How is she an expert in any of this? Because she talks about it? Does that make me an expert too?
We've talked about the peak of woke. Do you think that we've now coming to the end of it, or do you think that it will always remain there latent because of this feminization process that you've described?
Yeah, I'm worried that it will still be there. That it's only a matter of time before somebody whips up another moral outrage that we all have to be hysterical about, because the way that we neutralize those kinds of mass hysteria episodes is by talking about them rationally. And if we don't do that anymore, then we're not going to be able to neutralize them.
I find it weird that that's what she worries about, but anyway, it seems to me that it's because of conservatives we can't talk about things rationally. We can't be honest about the history of the US without conservatives accusing us of hating white people. We can't talk about immigration without conservatives wringing their hands about the death of white culture. We can't talk about abortion without conservatives wanting to know why we want to kill babies. We can't have nuance or logic or truth because conservatives run on emotion, mostly fear. And, well, it's worked out well for them, especially in our attention economy where clickbait gets the eyes, and thus the money. And no one wants boring, long talks about facts and history and blah, blah, blah. They want snappy one-liners they can easily repeat to shut a conversation down and feel like they won.
I think one of the most compelling pieces of evidence to me that the Great Feminization is not entirely natural. It's not just a product of women have now had a chance to compete, and it turns out they're better at everything. It's not just a natural result of women out-competing men, which is something that a lot of feminists say, right? They say, well, why is your newsroom full of ladies? Because ladies are great journalists. I don't know what to tell you. The piece of evidence that persuaded me that that's not what's going on is the way institutions tend to become more and more feminized with the passage of time. If it were just a matter of women out-competing men, you would expect institutions to reach 50-50 gender parity and then roughly stay there, if you assume that talent is equally distributed. But instead, we see that institutions that reach 50% women tend to then become 52, 55, 56. The one institution that's way far out at the end of that process is psychology, the field of psychology. 3/4 of graduate students in psychology now are women. It is an extremely feminized field. And we see that over and over in other institutions as well, although usually not so far advanced. As fields become feminized, what it looks like to me is they become distinctly unwelcoming to men. Because if you're a man and you're interested in psychology, maybe you're interested in particular branches of psychology that tend to appeal to the male mind more, like neuropsychology, the hard science stuff, whatever. But then you show up in your psychology department and it's a bunch of women and they are not interested in the same aspects of psychology that you are. They're not willing to debate with you in the way that you think academic debate should be conducted. You just find the whole atmosphere really, really feminized and you think, do I really want to spend my career here? I don't think I do.
I love how if men find something unwelcoming, it's women's fault and we need to defeminize it so men feel more welcome. But if women find something unwelcoming, well, that's her problem and she just has to deal or not do it. Anyway, Helen has no problem talking about the feminization of society, but has she really never heard of what happens when a profession becomes too female? Pay drops and it's viewed as less prestigious, less skillful.
There's a reason why you tend to see women underrepresented at startups. Because startups of all the kinds of institutions in the world tend to be the most mission-driven. They're all focused on just one thing, getting this company up off the ground. You start to see more female employees when it becomes a bigger institution that has an HR department and more staff and things like that. Women tend to thrive in that. But when it's just 5 guys in a garage, as a matter of simple demographics and observation, we observe that there are fewer women in companies of that kind.
Interesting. 46% was enough to be basically half of management, but 45% isn't enough to qualify as half of entrepreneurs. Anyway, they conclude by asking what one thing society isn't talking about but should be, to which Helen responds, falling birth rate. I expect to see her chatting with Chris Williamson soon. Anyway, that's it. I can't believe I had so much to say, though. I suppose I shouldn't have been surprised. This way of thinking is very lazy. At one point, Helen popped out with something about how if they can manage it, people will go back to the older, better model, referring to women at home and men at work, and that was the model for advertisements, not the daily life of the average American family throughout generations. Women have always worked. TLDR for this video, for Helen's article, women are always at fault. Doesn't matter what it is, a woman did something or did not do something. Which seems like a very simplistic answer, especially coming from someone who lauds logical conversation, but hey, I don't make the rules, Helen does. And per Helen's rules, it's okay for a man to make misogynistic remarks, draw misogynistic conclusions. It's women speaking up about it, that's the problem. It's okay for a man to wear a sexy woman's shirt, it's women speaking up about it, that's the problem. And no one was belittling what those men have done, taught, learned. They were objecting to the misogyny. But we're supposed to ignore the misogyny because, what about the other things they've done? Don't you care about that? Who cares about the women and girls observing their words, observing how women are depicted in these environments, internalizing what it all means about who they are as a person? Larry Summers wasn't making those remarks to his friends. He was giving a speech at a conference. The science man wasn't lounging at home when wearing that shirt. He was discussing a professional project on camera. The former Google engineer wasn't writing his private journal. He shared it with the whole company. But women just need to shut up and deal. Men don't need to concern themselves about being professional, about treating all people with respect. I suppose that's feminine. And that's it for this video. My socials and Patreon are linked below along with sources and resources. I would like to thank everyone for watching, and of course, I would like to give special thanks to my patrons. Have a wonderful day, support a woman-owned business, and I'll see you in the next one.